What would be your advice to that 18 to 20-year-old that's thinking about starting their business?
If you wait for the right time, it's never going to happen, because in life, there's always going to be something that's going to say, I shouldn't do this.
There's going to be moments, but I think one of the most important things is to define, what am I trying to accomplish, and chase after that.
You have to know that you may fail, and you have to be okay with that. And if you're not, it might not be for you. Sometimes that fear can overcome you a little bit. If you keep saying, what if, you'll be 20 years down the road still asking what if. You know, if you're passionate enough and you have the work ethic and the drive, take the leap. Don't feel you have to work for a living, live for a living. It's life. You just have to live.
Welcome to the Mick Luddy Podcast. Today we have a great guest on. His name is Kevin Kimball. He is the CEO of Game On Strategies, but I don't want to introduce him anymore. I want you to introduce yourself. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yeah, thanks, Trey. I appreciate it. So Kevin Kimball, CEO, fractional CMO of Game On Strategies. I've been doing this for almost 2 years now. Interesting enough, started in the sports space with the Oakland Raiders about 20 years ago, and then transitioned into Madden at EA. And then from that point on, I've been in gaming, working with some of the largest brands in the entertainment industry. Spider-Man, Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost Recon, Titanfall, Battlefield, the list kind of goes on and on. So it's been fun to work on. But as I moved forward, you know, I looked into how I could help scale brands in general, and that's how I started Game On Strategies.
I think that's super cool because all the titles that you just listed are the games that I grew up playing, which is super cool. And I love being able to talk to somebody that was a part of those things. And we're going to dig into what it was like to be a part of those big brand IPs. The first thing that I want to ask you, though, is you kind of label yourself as a brand anthropologist. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
It's interesting because it's a term I've only started using over the past year or so. And what it really means is I'm a big believer of taking insights and understanding people and sociology and how that works to influence brand culture. My first major is actually in sociology. And so that's where the precipice started there. And what I've been able to do with building these brands is look at the cultural aspect of these brands, not just the financial aspect. Say, okay, what's the monetization look like? What's the, financial opportunity? But how do we build a culture? And then with the culture, the brand actually elevates from there. And so that's where this whole idea of a brand anthropologist came from, is understanding the process and understanding the human behavior and why we attach to brands and what makes that tick. How do I get into certain brands? For example, if it's a game, if it's sports, if it's tech, what does that really mean for the end user? And that could be anywhere from the direct consumer or the buyer on the other end. I've been doing more B2B lately, and there's still a person on the other end. Even though it's business to business, there is a person making that decision on the other end. So what does that mean, and how do you connect with them?
Interesting. So you're taking a holistic approach to looking at the culture and how that influences the brand. When you walk into a company, what are you looking at within the culture to be able to make brand decisions? What does that practically look like?
It's interesting because just having this conversation yesterday with a potential client as we look at a tops-down model, right? And so one of the things I look for as soon as I go in is I almost do a gap analysis, but it's more about the culture. For example, what's their mission, vision, and pillars? Is that penetrating not only to the customers or outside of the organization, but is it internal? Is it in the organization as well? Because if I'm going to talk to a consumer in any touch point, if it's social, if it's sales, if it's internally, there has to be that I believe in this. And if your mission, vision, and pillars don't kind of fall down into that, there's a miss externally. And so that's one of the things I look for right away is I'll do a gap analysis internally to say, okay, does this line up? Like, is your mission and vision, are they clear? And can you articulate them? Can your internal people, do they believe in it? There have been some times where I've been in companies where the objective or mission is, make money. And it's like, that's great. Every business is in to make money, but how and why? Like, why are you making money? What is that? What are you helping with the consumer with? What challenge are you overcoming in the marketplace? If you can't define that in your mission and vision, then it actually starts to fall flat right away. So that's kind of the things I go in and look at right away. And it's one of the things that a lot of people don't want to look at. They want to look at execution. How do I make noise? How do I post on social? How do I create content? It's like, well, yes, that's the end result. But if you don't have alignment up front with your brand and what it really means, all those executions are going to fall short.
You know, I wasn't really sure what direction this podcast was going to take because you have such an extensive background and I had a lot of ideas. But I love this particular line right here because this is something that I've seen a lot, even throughout starting my business over the last 3 years. As intentional as I've tried to be with shaping the culture, it's hard. It's hard to do. So I'm kind of curious, when you walk into companies, how often is it that the founder has taken a lot of time to try to shape that culture? And what do you think are the factors that go into actually turning that vision to reality?
It's a great question because there's a lot to unpack there. Most founders I talk to are CEOs. Like I always say, there's no bad intentions. Everybody has the best intention. They think they're right for the business. But what sometimes you have to do is take a step back and really understand, you'll hear me say a lot, the why, right? I ask a lot of whys. I ask a lot of questions when I go in because that's how I learn about the business. Why are you doing this? What gap are you filling in the marketplace? And then what are you trying to achieve from a business standpoint, right? And like I said, it's not always financial. We all want to make money as a business, but what do you want to achieve? What do you want to solve in business? So it's interesting because what I try to do is go in and really get to, like, for example, meeting with someone who is a brand strategist as a CEO, which just happened a couple weeks ago. Great ideas. They built this brand over 10 years, okay? But especially, and this is in the gaming industry, but what has changed in the market over 10 years? The market has completely changed. We went through COVID. We went through a transition from physical goods to digital goods. We have a new, we'll call it a demographic into the market. You have the player base has grown incrementally because you have new users coming in. So just saying, hey, we built this 10 years ago, it may not apply now, right? And so one of the things I try to go in is and I do it in a very constructive way, just ask questions and then look at the current marketplace of what's happening. Like, what are we trying to address? And you'll hear me say challenge a lot. I ask a lot about what are the challenges you're facing? Like, for example, if we have a brand in play, why isn't it resonating in the market? Let's go back, and this goes back to the anthropology side. Let's go back and look at consumer behavior. Where are they falling out in the consumer journey? You know, is it an awareness thing? Is it an engagement thing? Or is it a purchase intent thing? What is happening? And so that's one of the things I like to go in and really kind of look at and really uncover what's going on. And from there, it could be easy as a messaging thing. Like, it's great from an awareness standpoint, but that message doesn't resonate with the next part of the funnel. Okay, well, how are we keeping that same overarching message, but changing it just a little bit to make sure I'm taking you, okay, you're aware of my product, now I want you to engage, right? Then what does that mean for purchase intent? Because the thing is it doesn't work across the board. You kind of have to shape for whatever part of the journey you're in.
Okay, that makes sense. So if culture influences brand and brand influences purchasing decisions, then what you're saying is the culture something has to be defined within the culture. So if I wanted to influence brand by changing my culture, what are some of the things that I could do if I needed to change up the culture to be able to grow the business on the back end?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's not just words, it's how you act, right? And that's changing everything from if you're thinking of internal culture, you know, it's how many meetings we have. Is it a flat organization? Is it a very hierarchical organization? What are you trying to get out of it? Right. And so I think you have to really look at what your objective is. And like I said, each business may be different, right? Some organizations work very flat where everybody comes into a room and says, okay, let's create a think tank. Some organizations don't work that way. They need something more with a hierarchy to say, hey, I'm the decision maker. I need input, but this is what it is. And so I think you really need to decide what that looks like from a culture standpoint. But it's also making sure that, you know, one of the things I've learned over the years is no matter what level you are or where you are in an organization, and I've worked a lot with cross-functional teams in the past as well, and that's one of the things I do with my business is try to bring cross-functional teams into alignment. The alignment part is crucial for culture, right? And so if I have we'll say 5 different verticals. We'll say, whatever they are. They're all working against their objective, right? And we'll say sales, because this happens a lot with sales. Sales teams have a business objective. I need to bring in this much money for the company. I get that. But if your brand or product or PR team, they don't have that sales objective, right? And so they're trying to make sure the brand resonates from more of a cultural standpoint. How do these two work together? Right? Because one's just getting the sale, doing anything to get the sale, but they may not be adhering to the brand. Right? And so to make it internally, how do you get everybody to work together? And where do those cross sections fit? Like, for example, one of the companies I was with, being the global lead on a brand, I worked with the partnerships team, where the partnerships team had a revenue goal of bringing in partnerships. Well, some of those partnerships didn't fit the brands I'm working on. So what we did as an organization is we actually reorged of what that would look like internally, where our forecast for the game itself was tied to the partnerships guys. So there was this cross section of now their revenue objectives or their objectives for the year were tied to sales. So they're not going to do anything to hurt the sales of the game, which was happening in the beginning, right? Because they were putting brands that didn't fit into the game to drive revenue for the sales org or partnerships org, and it just wasn't a good fit, right? And so you have to kind of look at how that alignment works together and then do that early enough where you're not at your go-to-market phase. You have to do it really early, where you set the positioning, set the pillars, and then set the alignment, and then almost like the KPIs for each individual vertical, where it all ladders up. And if you could do that early, that's where you really get the wins, and actually you get more efficiency, more effectiveness, and more brand resonance in the market.
What would you say are 3 questions that someone could ask themselves if they feel like they need a brand realignment but want to start with culture, and they want to identify, what do I need to change in my culture in order to influence the brand?
Yeah, I think it's understanding who your audience is. Like going back with your ICP and understanding your individual consumer profile, or what we'll also build out what we call TAMs, or target addressable markets. Really figuring that out and what that looks like, and then the emotional drivers for that. Because once again, it goes back to alignment. Once you can say, okay, here's our North Star, here's our ICP, how do we work together to get there, right? And then you have the different cross-functionals or different parts of the organization really laddering up into that, which creates the synergies of more of a team-based dynamic versus, hey, I want to be an individual contributor, right? And then once you feel you're like working as a team, things start to move a little bit more flow more naturally.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is identify who you want to target, figure out how to tie teams together to influence certain goals.
Correct.
And not work against each other.
Correct.
And that should lead to a positive brand outcome or marketing outcome.
Correct.
Okay.
And those are kind of the keys. If you go back and like we were talking about the brand anthropologist, is that's one of the things I focus on even with Game On Strategies, is understanding those motivators up front versus just going to the GTM or go to market. That's, like I said, that's the content, that's outward facing. That's the easy part. If you don't have this alignment internally, your campaign technically falls apart later on.
Okay. And you've talked about how you've worked on some really, really big names before, and now you're working with some like more independent developers and things like that, correct?
Correct.
There's something that there's a word and a phrase that caught my attention as I was reading through just some of the things that you do, and it's the word and phrase emotional DNA of IP. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? And why is it important?
So each IP, or we'll say this, IP in terms of entertainment, which is intellectual property, or even as a product, if you go into tech or any other, the emotional DNA is what it stands for. Like, what emotional driver emotional benefit am I getting out of this product? This happens for every product we consume. We are humans. We buy and have relationships based on emotional drivers. Even as a product, even in CPG, and I'll use a toothpaste equivalent, there may be brands or products that are better, right? If you go through the feature list or whatever, it's better. But say if I like a certain toothpaste, I'm always going to go back to that brand because of the brand DNA it has. I use another example in the tech side, and I've used this for, God, maybe 10 years now. And if you look at two phone products, and I won't name the names, but one about 7 or 8 years was very feature heavy and was probably the best in market from a feature set, better pixel, better camera, better everything. The other product was more FOMO, or fear of missing out. Everyone had it. The ads were more dancing in the streets, having fun, music, emojis. You can kind of get where I'm going with this. The people resonate with the emotional part versus, hey, this product is actually better. And that is the part of the brand DNA. If you can really figure out who you are and focus on that brand or emotional DNA, people are going to gravitate. I think the brands that miss this are the brands that jump every 2 years to a different campaign, right? I will say this, and I'll call this out because I think I just saw it a couple days ago. I think it was released this week, but and kudos to Yeti and Wyden Kennedy. There's a new Yeti ad out. And if you want to talk about the emotional DNA of a brand, that spot nailed it. It introduces a cooler to start, but it talks about all the different ways in a lifestyle you would use it. It talks about a dog. It talks about surfing. It talks about this. So it's not necessarily focused on the cooler. It's focused on all the things you do with a cooler by your side. And the only times you actually see the cooler is in the beginning and the end of the spot. And it just, like, going back to your emotional DNA, that hits it, right? That is a great brand spot.
Interesting. So as I'm crafting an IP, whether it be a product, a service, whatever I'm developing, right? How do I develop the emotional DNA and then implement that into my marketing strategy? Is there a set of questions? Is there a framework? Like, what's the thought process to be able to develop this thing?
Yeah, there is. And it goes back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier, understanding your audience and what they care about. And so I built out a framework that I use. It's called Growth. It's an acronym that makes a lot of sense. It's easy to understand. But mainly, the G stands for gather insights. And your first part of everything is that's exactly what it is. And that should be the bulk of what you're looking for, right? I have a product. Here's what it does in the marketplace. Who uses it and why do they use it? Once again, it can't be just functional. It can't be, if we use the cooler analogy, I need to keep things cold. Well, there's multiple choices besides a Yeti. Why Yeti, right? So what's that emotional resonance? So I start with the gather insights. And then the R is actually road mapping the strategy. And so this is where we're talking about alignment, right? And so I have the insights. Now I want to get alignment internally and making sure the insights actually spark creative conversations with the right cross-functionals, right? So what I mean by roadmap too is it's almost like a work back schedule where we're all on the same page and here are the things we need to answer along the way. And what that does is it creates alignment internally. The O then is the optimize the positioning, where I look at, okay, we have the insights, we have feedback from cross-functionals, we understand the timing. Let's look at what the positioning looks like and what that really means. And that could be the positioning, your pillars, everything that goes into that brand side of things that really get into what the consumer will hear and feel. And then, the W is, win with optimization or win with strategy. So that takes it more to the executional route, right? Where you're going to now looking at things and test and learn and putting things into market. Then the T actually goes into test and learn. So that's just A/B testing, what this looks like, really looking at the consumer itself and saying what works, what doesn't. And this is all part of your strategy session. So we're not necessarily in market yet. And then the H is kind of where you start to go to market and actually execute. And it's what I call it harness the wins. So let's look at the wins, what happened, and then celebrate the wins, even how small they are, because that's going to help perpetuate your campaign moving forward. So I try to focus on this strategy or framework to kind of give you steps to go through to kind of say, okay, did we do this or how did it work? And, it helps align a brand to go to market.
Interesting. Can you give an example of a time when you've implemented this and just the overall results so we can bring it down to a practical level? Because it's easy to understand. You can understand it conceptually, but then bringing it down to implementation steps, what would this look like for your average business owner, developer, whoever you think it would be the best for?
Yeah. So, like you said, it looks good on paper, right, as a framework. If I'm going into a larger organization, it's a longer process, right? And there's more test and learning and more of that upfront alignment. I would say as I use it now, it's really good because a lot of the either CEOs or owners that I'm working with may not be marketers, right? They're engineers, they're devs, and so forth. And so walking in and saying, okay, here's how we're going to do this, and this is what it looks like from a marketing standpoint, it just helps in that overall conversation. Because what I've noticed is sometimes even going in, and we were talking this before we sat down, is going into a new studio or a new IP or a new tech is, especially with engineers, they want results right away. Okay, I want to get to market. I want to go fast. I want to make noise. Well, without that framework, making noise is really hard. Or are you making the right noise at the right time? So it really helps me reset and kind of walk people through why it's important, right? And so you do have different timelines. So with a smaller company, you condense timeline. You know, the growth framework may be a model of 6 months. With a larger company, it could be 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? So it really just depends on the product and the company itself.
You know, you've used the word noise multiple times, and I wrote out this email a while ago, and it was a concept that I was just that I was working through in my head. The goal isn't to make noise, it's to make music. People don't remember noise, but they remember music. Music sticks in your head because you listen to music for different reasons. When you're going on a run, when you're going to work out, when you're feeling sad, when you're feeling happy, when you're in the car going on a road trip. Those things stick in your head and it creates memories. It attaches to memories. And I feel like that's what needs to happen in marketing as well. So if you create noise, it might be annoying. You might notice it. It might grab your attention for a second, but it's immediately going to be forgotten. Your goal is to be remembered.
100%. And it goes back to the Yeti example I was just saying, right? How many TV ads or spots or pre-roll on Instagram do you see, especially in today's age? We're blitzed with so much information. How do you stand out? How do you go more than just making noise? And what I mean by that is you kind of explained it very well. There are times where if I'm trying to drive awareness, and we'll go back to the KPIs metric, right? If I'm trying to drive awareness, noise is great. But if I'm trying to look at the full consumer journey and I want awareness, engagement, and purchase intent, noise is actually not great, right? Because if I'm just going to make noise, I can make something cool, which I hate that term, cool and flashy, and people are going to talk about it. But all you're ever going to stay at is that surface level, which is the awareness. And I'm never going to convert. And so we've gone through this, especially, and this is something I learned in the gaming industry. You know, you can make an award-winning trailer or spot, and you can get 2 to 3 million views. And then the next month, all that engagement comes all the way back down to pre-awareness, right? And then it's like, what do you got? You made noise, but your community's not sticking. You don't have anyone else purchase intent. You don't have wish list support. You don't have anything going on. It was great at an event, but now what? And so what I really try to focus on is, and I try to work with, leaders and say, okay, noise is good, but you have to look at it and why you're trying to do it. Let's be clear on the objective. There are times where maybe noise, just noise for noise sake is good. But if you're looking at a brand, and this is what I was going about, where you have to roadmap, you have to understand all your touch points and if they make sense together, right? Because you got to bring someone from an awareness point. Then what are you giving them next to engage? And then what are you giving them next to purchase?
You can't just create noise. It's noise, and then what are you following it up
Correct.
with? Because if noise creates that immediate high engagement moment, well, they're not just going to buy based on one interaction. It's a sequence of interactions. So what are you going to follow that with?
Correct. And it's not just noise, like to your point. Noise
and by
means
noise,
I'm
that's like that could be something viral. That could be something trendy. It could be tapping into something that may not have to do directly relates to the product per se, but it gets you that instant impact of viral attention.
That's exactly it. And sometimes, especially if we look at influencers or creator content economy, I can go out and buy a lot of noise. All right. Now, we go back to the target. Am I hitting the right target? Mm-hmm. Like if I'm selling a Yeti cooler and I'm hitting 18-year-olds on TikTok because that's where they live and play, and I get tons of, likes or shares and everything else, am I hitting the right on? I made noise, but they're not following down the funnel, right? So sometimes it's even like, okay, look at who you're going after and make sure, not to mention as a media buyer, I've spent a lot of money on that platform to buy those users. So your cost per acquisition goes way up, right? Or do I take a lesser known platform or a very specific target, focus on my content for that target because I know they're going to go through the purchase funnel, and now my cost per acquisition goes down. Instead of going from hitting 1 million users on TikTok, but I'm only getting a 3% engagement rate on my website or click-throughs, I'm going to maybe hitting 200,000 people on Instagram at an older demographic, but I'm getting 150,000 of those to convert.
Yeah.
Right? From a company standpoint, that's more strategic than just making noise. Now, are you going to get all the awards and accreditation? And is the agency going to love that? No, but it's better for the business. And I do think they're not mutually exclusive, right? You can make noise and be brand relevant. It just has to be done with thought, right? And you got to go back and really look at how and why you're doing it, and then the different touch points.
Yeah, I think that, and you can speak on this more, and I'd love for you to speak on it, but I've heard about bigger businesses, they want to bring in marketers that can do influencer marketing. But the reason they want to bring them in is not, they can go out and find the biggest names themselves. They want to find the smaller creators that have a smaller following, but a really loyal audience, to be able to be very strategic with how they're utilizing influencer marketing, because that leads to higher conversions. Because someone could have 5 million followers, but they could make a post and either no one's going to see it or it's just the wrong product for their audience, versus someone that has a smaller following, perfect product for their audience, and it's brand relevant.
Correct. And I think you nailed it there. And I think this is where gaming has a leg up on a lot of the other industries, is just because we've been doing it for 10, 15 years. I mean, if you think about it, some of the early influencers were in gaming playing the games. Now, back then we used to give them a copy of the game, and that was what they wanted.
Live streaming started with gaming, and now it's huge now.
Exactly.
And it's developed, but it started with gaming.
But if you think about what you're saying too, it's like, okay, and this is one of the things I try to work on from a culturally relevant standpoint, which we go back to the anthropology side, is even as I look at content creators, and they're not even called influencers more, it's just content creators or the content or creator economy. How do I bring in people that, if I'm using their platform, right? If I'm going after, we did this thing on the Callisto Protocol with a bunch of NFL players. And it's like, okay, great. Yeah, you went after NFL players. Who doesn't? Well, we picked out players that were hardcore gamers that had a propensity to post about gaming and our type of game on their platform organically. So now I know they have those types of consumers within their, like George Kittle's one of them, and he is one of the best guys to work with, period. Just a great overall guy, huge Halo guy.
And this is coming from a Raiders fan too.
Yeah, okay.
Man, that's how we know we can trust your information.
Good people are good people, and George is one of the best I've ever worked with from that side of the business. But yeah, so huge Halo guy. So we did the thing with him for the Callisto Protocol, and because when you get that genuine interest, the consumer sees that it's genuine, right? It's not a bought and paid for ad, but it's genuine, and that means a lot coming from the brand itself. And George has a brand. I mean, nowadays, even athletes or celebrities or influencers are protecting their own brand. So they don't want to just get paid to do something that doesn't necessarily fit their fan base, right? And so if you can find that mix, that's when you have something that feels real and authentic. Even everybody knows it's a paid ad. I get that. But, that's how the influencer network should work versus, hey, I'm being paid to do this and I really don't like what I'm selling. And you can tell.
You know what's interesting is I saw a video by Mark Zuckerberg yesterday. He was on somebody's pod. He's been on a lot of podcasts recently, but he was talking about the difference between Netflix and like social media platforms. And Netflix, it doesn't have nearly as many users because you have to pay for it. It's not free. Social media, it's completely free. But the way that social media makes money is they have advertisers. And if you only have a few advertisers, well, you're not going to push out very many good ads to people. But the more advertisers that you have, the more segments you can create and the better ads you can push to people. So even when you're talking about, well, it's still a paid advertisement, paid advertising isn't bad. It's bad paid advertising is bad. But if you have a good ad and it's paid, people don't care. Content is content.
Yeah, and you make up a good point too, because it's not necessarily just, this is where a media buyer, a good media buyer, or a good brand strategy comes into play. Who is our target and how are we targeting them? Even on your paid platforms, because as you know, TikTok, Instagram, everything has algorithms built in, and those data sets, and one of the best ones I've ever worked with was actually Amazon, because their data is just, they have so much data.
Who doesn't buy from Amazon, man?
Well, that's the whole point. So you can go in and literally pick out your segments of exactly, here's what I want the cross segments to be, here's what I want them to do, here's what I want them to buy, or what they have bought in the past. And I can go into any of those now media platforms and pick that out and be very specific at who I target, right? Which therefore drives better cost per acquisition. I mean, if I go back 10 or 15 years, you're literally going, hey, I'm going to Facebook and saying, hey, how do I get gamers? Well, you know, if I'm playing Call of Duty versus Madden versus Dota, those are three separate types of gamers, but I just spent my media budget on everybody.
Yeah.
Now I can go in and say, we'll say, you know, the big one right now is Arc Raiders. I can go in and say, I want Arc Raiders players or propensity to play that have played these games, that live in these areas, that have bought these games recently, and like these other aspects of media consumption, and target those people.
Yeah.
And then let's look at the conversion rates and then what that really means. And that's where the test and learn comes in, right? But you can get so specific nowadays that even with influencers, you do the same thing. So if I get an influencer, I look at the cross section of what their habits are, our habits are for the game, or the brand tenets, where those align. And then I go through my media platform and say, okay, where those fit together, target all those people. And that's where you get really good acquisition.
I want you to speak to the founder and the young developer on this one, someone that wants to launch something from the ground, has a really good idea and they want to get started, but they haven't quite yet. What advice would you give to them on what mistake they should avoid at all costs? What is a mistake that you often see that keeps people from launching something great, and how can they avoid it?
It's moving in one generalization, it's moving too fast. And that could mean a bunch of things. And so I'll break it down a little bit. You can move too fast from an MVP or a minimum viable product, right? You can move too fast not understanding where it fits in the marketplace. You can move too fast by not understanding your audience and what challenge you're facing. Like one of the big things, and one of my mentors told me is, especially when I was exploring going independent, is always think of how you're solving a problem for the consumer. And if you can't define that, you're moving too fast, because you can have a great idea, but if you're not solving a problem, you're not going to have the market opportunity, right? And so sometimes it's just taking a step back and really understanding what your product stands for and what your brand stands for. And like I said, it's once you do that, and sometimes people want to move fast, but if you take the time to do that, it allows you to move quicker in every other step, right? Because one thing, I use a term called thrash, and it just means that if I start moving fast, then I have to go back and redo things, right? And then that's the thrash that you don't want to worry. You always want to worry about how you have forward momentum versus stopping, resetting. Because when you stop and reset, either from a product or a brand standpoint, it's going to take you months to get back even to where you were. So you have dollars, you have time, you have manpower, all that is now wasted. And that's where thrash comes into play. And that's what kills early stage products.
Interesting. That's excellent advice. And I want to click the rewind button for a little bit on your past and your experiences. I want to bring it back, because obviously now you're heading Game On Strategies, but you didn't start there. You mentioned it briefly in the very beginning. You've worked on some amazing projects, Spider-Man, Ghost Recon, and many other projects, and really helped them get to market. I want to hear a little bit about those experiences. Can you list off some, just to kind of reiterate, what are some of the biggest titles that you've worked on personally? The
biggest titles, Spider-Man for the 4 was the biggest. I mean, just from a IP standpoint and working with Marvel and Disney, I would say that was also from a revenue standpoint. And then you also have Rainbow Six Siege, Battlefield 4. Ghost of Tsushima was a really big success as a new IP at PlayStation. I mean, those are some of the bigger ones. You know, you can get into Titanfall, you can get into Dead Space 2. There are some really cult classics, so to speak, that did well, especially for the genre. But I would say Spider-Man, Battlefield, and those are the...
Man, Battlefield 4 was my favorite. It's probably, I don't play video games anymore, but my favorite video game of all time. So that's very cool to hear that you worked on that.
So funny story about that. It goes back to the influencer side of things. That whole marketing campaign only in Battlefield was based because we were doing play tests. And we started seeing some of the people we brought in to do play tests do just amazing things that even the developers didn't know you could do in the game. And so we looked at it as marketers and said, wait a second, because we're trying to differentiate from Call of Duty at the time. And it was like, wait a second, there's something here.
It was a way better game than Call of Duty at the time. Sorry, but...
But if you go back and look at that ad campaign, we actually, once we saw that, then we tried to reenact how they did it, and we couldn't do it. So then we brought the influencers back in for them to play and show us. And then we had them give testimonials on, that was our TV spot, is we created 6 different spots with influencers talking about the Battlefield experience. And this was, 10, 12 years ago. So, you know, that's, like you were saying earlier, that's like the beginning of that type of whole movement. It's like, wait a second. And it really drove the only in Battlefield moments. I mean, that's still synonymous with the franchise.
Yeah. No, that all the games that you mentioned are very, very good games and very big games as well. I'd love to hear from you on the people that didn't get to experience some of those things, the people that didn't get to see these big things being created. What are some of the biggest lessons that you took out of that? And what is more importantly something that people may not know goes on behind the scenes that drives some of the growth of these things?
Yes, that's a good point. Because there's, like I said, in some of these larger companies, you're talking about, especially with Spider-Man or some of these other new IP franchises, you're talking about a 2 to 3 year workup. Like, so the consumer market only sees the last 6 to 9 months because that's when your go-to-market campaign hits. But a lot of the back end, what I've been very blessed with, and I'll give a couple of people that actually brought me into striking distance, which was Steve Papoutsis and Glenn Schofield, credit. At EA, they brought marketers into the room to listen to the dev team, to understand how the decisions were being made and why, right? And so you're not looking at it from an outward standpoint. And it's always given me a different perspective of when I work with the dev teams or engineers or products to understand more of what it is and what they're trying to do, right? And so I think to your question of, there's a lot of that buildup between the first year of what's going on, making sure marketing and product are aligned, right? Because they have to be in sync. Then you also have this difference of product marketing versus brand marketing, where product marketing is taking information from outside, bringing it back to the product, saying this is what we're seeing. Brand marketing is more taking the product that's built and taking it to market. But there's this big relationship that has to happen between product and brand very, very early. And I think that's one of the biggest learnings I've had, because it's going to make you a better marketer in the end and actually understand what you're trying to do in market. And it's also part of that relationship building, right? If I'm building trust with the product team or engineers, they trust my insights when I'm saying, hey, we're doing this in marketing versus the other way around, right? And there's still times, I think we talked about this earlier, where I'm brought in as a consultant now and it's like, hey, I just want to go to market. Hey, I want to turn the lights on. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. You're not going to be successful. Can I take media budgets and just go to market and do things? Yes. But for me, those early stages are crucial to be successful, right? And so those are some of the big learnings, is building the trust, building the relationship, building trust not only with the product teams, but also with your teams in generally, like your cross-functional teams, bringing them into the, opening it up and showing them how things are working. We talked about win with alignment. That's where that comes from, right? Early on, hey, here's our roadmap. This is a 3-year product roadmap, but here's you can see all the stages and when we will bring you in, because a lot of things that happen is when people don't understand what's going on, that's when, I won't say panic, but that's when they worry or have questions about what's going on. But if you give them the roadmap earlier on and say, hey, in 6 months, we're going to do a brand strategy. We're going to do a canvas session. We're going to bring everybody in. We're going to bring you. In 1 year from launch, we're going to do this. And in 6 months from launch, we're doing all this. People are bought in. Mm-hmm. And getting people to buy in early, creating that trust, creating that culture. We're going back to the beginning of the conversation, that culture. That's what drives good campaigns on the back end.
It's really interesting because as I listen to you, one of my favorite books that I've ever read is the Elon Musk biography, just because it teaches you so much about how the greatest entrepreneur of our generation has just lived up through his early stage of life and then built his businesses from the ground up. And there's this moment where they're talking about Tesla and the way that they develop their vehicles. They have their design team and their engineering team next door to each other. And they're always communicating because the design team can't design something that doesn't work from an engineering perspective and vice versa. Engineers need to think like designers and designers need to think like engineers. So when you're explaining this whole process, when marketing and product come together, you're utilizing the best of both worlds because marketers' jobs is to understand the end consumer. Product designers' jobs is to build an incredible product. You need the insights from both in order to figure out how to make money and develop a product that people actually want.
100% agree. And that's what I'm doing now is I'm working with early stage and stealth companies to actually define product fit, market fit, road mapping. What does the consumer need? We talked about the emotional or brand anthropologist. Understanding those things. And what I try to do now is I bring them to the developer or engineer. I don't make decisions. I'm not a creative. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a product guy. What I do is I want to say, I'm going to give you all the information so you have all the information to make your own decision based on your expertise, right? And to your point, that's where the fit comes in. And that's why even one of the companies I'm working with now, we're 3 to 4 years out from product. And when we talk to people like, why is the marketing person here already? It's like, well, because we already understand the market. We understand the consumer versus building a product and then hiring a marketer later and say, hey, can you create content for us? Well, it's almost too late. Like you could have a bad fit for the product at that point and you don't even know it.
Yeah. Working with these big companies, you've kind of touched on this a little bit. There's a buildup with big companies, and for big companies, and for something like Spider-Man, there's a way longer window, something smaller, shorter window. Can you explain what brand momentum means, not just large scale, but at a practical level, and how to build that brand momentum if someone is launching something themselves? Yeah,
the brand momentum is being very strategic. Right? Understanding at what touch points you're trying to achieve and being very clear with your KPIs. For example, if it's a new IP or new product in general and you're taking it to market, you're understanding you're starting from zero, right? You have no user base, you have no consumer base. So what does that really mean? Brand momentum is understanding your primary audience and their core rationale for purchasing something or at this point, engaging with something. And focusing on that and being very clear and true to those consumers without trying to go too big too fast, right? Because if you could build a core base, then you're going to drive word of mouth, which is the best driver or momentum for any brand is word of mouth, especially now with social. So if I can do that first and foremost, my brand momentum will obviously pick up. So you start with that core or their primary segment, then you move on to your secondary, then tertiary as you grow. The key is to not try to expand too fast. You almost have to let it happen where the market's telling you it should happen. And so to really generate brand momentum, you have to be clear with your messaging, clear on your value proposition for that core consumer base, and not try to do a shotgun approach too quick. You have to be clear on what you're trying to do with your core base and then let them be the drivers for you and tell you if you're on the right track or not. Because they'll tell you, that core base will tell you real quick if you're on the right track, if you have the right messaging, the right value proposition, and that's the best feedback you're going to get.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Man, there's been so many insights just from a marketing and brand perspective that you've dropped. But I know for you, you're making a shift out of just doing gaming, but you're also trying to get into the consulting leg of things. Talk to me a little bit about like what stage of the journey you're in entrepreneurship right now and what you're looking to grow into.
Yeah, I think, it's a great segue because the last 2 years, starting Game On Strategies, it was based on working with gaming partners. But I quickly learned that the idea and how I view brands kind of goes outside gaming. And one of the things I've been very fortunate is to work on, over 40 products, right? And so one of the things I took from gaming is being able to take new IP or IP that has been mispositioned in the marketplace and go back and learn how to do all that. It's almost like the thing practice. You just practice, practice, practice. Doing that for 40 plus games, I've seen it all over the board. And so now as I take that game plan or that playbook and say, look, it's not just for gaming. I can do it for products outside of that, because if I'm trying to do the same things like brand resonance, value proposition, effective marketing, bring down your cost per acquisition, your lifetime value, and look at all those core metrics, they translate into most products. I say CPG is the one I stay away from because there is a little bit different of a value proposition versus CPG versus high-end consumer goods or
What's CPG?
Consumer products.
Okay.
So mainly if you're looking at toothpaste, bleach, stuff like that, stuff that we buy are non-repeatable. The value proposition and how people buy is a little bit different. So if you look at like Procter and Gamble and stuff, the people rely on data based on trends, which is a very clear indicator of how people will purchase in the future. If you look at other products, if you look at tech / entertainment / sports, where you have to create a want. Like in CPG, there's a need. And what I like to do is where I try to put my value at is creating a want, right? And so to go back, what we're saying is, what I really try to do now at Game On Strategy is just create that want and look at the playbook. And what I like doing is understanding things earlier on in the process, asking the right questions and being able to work with founders / CEOs to understand what those principles are and what they're trying to do in market. And so I use that growth playbook to go in very early and understand what that is. And like I said, it's a lot of learnings from the gaming industry. I know it's games as a product, but like I said, it's the new IP, understanding who's the consumer, why do they care? Those same questions go for, if you're talking, I told you I worked for the Oakland Raiders. It's the same thing you would do for a new program, a new season ticket campaign, a new season with the Oakland Raiders or the Denver Broncos, all right? It's going to be who is the consumer and why do they care? Because even in sports, each year they care for a different reason. Mm-hmm. So you can't necessarily, it's fandom, it's why. And so that goes across for any product, and that's what I'm trying to do now with Game On Strategies.
Really interesting. And what I find the most interesting is the fact that you've developed a great reputation and rapport with some people in these big companies. But you've decided, you know what, I'm not going to keep playing that game. I'm going to decide to go the entrepreneur route. What is the driving force behind that? Because with the 9 to 5 working at these big companies, I mean, I have a grandfather that just had shoulder surgery. He works for Google, and all he had to do was call up, and his insurance provider's like, how much time do you need off? How much is it going to be? These crazy benefits. And obviously Google's a huge company. There's benefits of working for big companies, entrepreneurship, you lose that sort of thing. So what was the driver behind you starting your own business?
Yeah, I think I was, over the past years and PlayStation was one of the best places I've ever worked. I mean, great people. It was really hard to leave there, but it was a chance to build something at striking distance from the ground up. And so I was the first marketing hire there. And I've always had that itch to build. And sometimes in larger companies, you're part of the org, right? You're a gear that works in the org, and it's great people, great process. And I learned, like between EA, Ubisoft, and PlayStation, I learned a lot. But what I also learned is there was a gap, right? There's a gap for what I'm trying to do now with Game On Strategies, where you have a product and then you have a go-to-market plan, right? And even at some of these large companies, the marketing doesn't get involved early enough, right? But you're expected to hit the results. With a shift in the market, so we had COVID, so we went from physical to digital, and then there was a big shift in the gaming industry, a lot of reorgs going on, and there was an opportunity, at least as how I see it, is there's a lot of what we call single A and double A games in the market that are going to be more creative, and they don't have, if you look at EA and PlayStation, great games, they don't always have the creative opportunities because they're beholden to shareholders. They have to report to the street. They need revenue each year, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have a certain type of game that looks well. When you go the indie route, it's all about creatives and what they want to do. So what led me to start this was, like I said, it started out with just gaming, and that was it. It's like, okay, I can help a lot of these creatives, and I had a lot of friends that left places like NetEase or left EA that were starting their own studios, and I loved working with Glenn Schofield at striking distance. I loved that relationship, working directly with him. So it led me to say, okay, how can I help these people? And I have a skill that actually is useful early in the process. So it was understanding, we were talking about earlier, like when, as an entrepreneur, what's the gap in the marketplace? How can I fulfill a challenge? I thought I could fill the gap and help with the challenge that some of these startup studios go through to how to position themselves, not only as a game, but also a brand new studio. Mm-hmm. Like you're unknown, you have no quality, you have nothing out in market, so no one knows of you. You don't know the quality. It's a new brand in general, and so you're trying to establish a brand and an IP at the same time, which is what I like doing. Mm-hmm. So that was the reason for the move.
That makes sense, man. And I think that I relate to that a lot. There's just some excitement about building something. There's excitement about the ideas and vetting out the ideas and getting them launched off the ground. There's just a different level of energy and ambition when it comes to those things. I have an interesting question for you. You said that you're a fractional CMO and you come in to do brand strategy for people as well.
Correct.
If the companies that you come into were a football team, what coaching position, what position would you play in that football team?
That's a really great question. I've never really thought of it that way, but it's something. Right now, it would almost be. It's interesting because the dynamic would be a little bit different. It almost be like a GM. Okay, so you're there to give guidance and you're there to understand how it all works together. But I would say like some of the owners are actually the head coaches where they're doing. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it, mm-hmm. right? And I see the synergy between GMs and coaches almost like they're equal. Like they have to work together. So I would come in and give guidance, ask a lot of questions. How do I support you? Here's what we need. Here's the timing and stuff like that. So it'd almost be like a GM in that aspect. Like I said, because I would see the head coach as the CEO. I mean, the leveling would be different, but of what they do in terms of football versus what I do, that's kind of how I would see it.
Interesting. And obviously a GM is a higher position, leadership type of position. What do you feel like are some leadership traits that you have that put you in a well-positioned place there? And where have you established some of those things? Why are they important to you?
Yeah, it actually started early for me. So I was in the military, of course, in the Navy during the first Gulf War and then the Bosnian-Serbian conflict. So a lot of it started out there as far as how I viewed things and understanding how to work as a team and understanding that it takes a team to complete a mission. And then from there, I actually played college football at Montana State. And then you even talk about even further, like how do you work as a team? As a defensive lineman, you have a certain position. You don't succeed unless everybody else works together, right? So understanding those things, the team aspect. The other things that the military and football taught me earlier on is the whole thing about alignment, right? When you go in and you plan or strategy, both those things you have to go in with a game plan. Mm-hmm. A mission, you sit down and do mission briefings so you understand what you're trying to do before you go into a mission, because once everything starts going on, you have to rely on your process, your strategy. Same thing as game planning for football, right? You watch film, you understand what's going on. Here's what we're going to do. Here's our game plan before you get to a game. So I take, even though that's a military and football philosophy, I take a lot of that philosophy into business where, okay, let's plan, let's identify gaps, let's identify weaknesses. Where can we counterattack? What can we do here? What does this look like? And if you can look at all the what if scenarios ahead of time and the possibilities, like I used that term thrash earlier on, when it gets real and the thrash happens, you're worried about one thing, not 20. Right? And that's kind of where I try to focus in the business and some of the learnings I've taken. Now, I would say EA helped really sharpen those skills early on in my career with some really great people. But that's kind of how I use my leadership style moving forward.
Wow. You've taken an interesting journey into entrepreneurship. When did you start your business?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay, so you did it.
23.
You did it a little bit later in life after you've developed after you developed a lot of experience and rapport with some of these bigger companies and bigger names within the companies. Even right now, we're in a generation, especially my generation, Gen Z, and even Gen Alpha coming up. The majority of them, I think the stat was between like 40 and 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds are starting businesses rather than going to college, which is an insane percentage. And honestly, it's probably a little lower than that, but still a way higher percentage than before.
Right.
What would be your advice to that 18 to 20-year-old that's thinking about starting their business right now? What advice would you give to them?
I would say this, and you might find this funny. It's but I have it literally tattooed on my arm. It's faith over fear, right? There's a lot of things. There's never going to be a right time. If you wait for the right time, it's never going to happen, because in life, there's always going to be something that's going to say, I shouldn't do this, right? And sometimes that fear can overcome you a little bit and say, well, I don't want this, or what? Like you just talked about having the medical coverage and this, and what if this happens, and what if you keep saying what if? You'll be 20 years down the road still asking what if. So, if you're passionate enough and you have the work ethic and the drive, take the leap. And there's never a good time. There's always going to be something in the middle that says maybe you shouldn't. But if you feel passionate about it, then take the leap and go into that business. And it's something I've thought about a lot. Funny about that is when I went to college and got my business degree, it was actually an entrepreneurial school, Menlo College over on the peninsula.
Okay.
And that's what they preach, was entrepreneurship. And so even at an early, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I got brought into a great opportunity and then stayed there. But that's kind of always been an itch. And that's why I preach, especially if you're younger and you have a good idea and this is what you want to do and you have a passion, follow that passion. Don't feel you have to work for a living, live for a living. I don't believe in work-life balance, especially as an entrepreneur now. It's life, right? And if you just have to live. And when you do what you love and you get up every day and you really love it, it's not work. I go to bed now, or I'll stay up late thinking about things and jotting things down, and what if we did this, and what if we did this, and I love it. I'm not counting the hours. So that would be my number one thing is, have the faith that you can do it. If you have the passion for it, then go live it.
Interesting. So this is coming from somebody that went the alternate route of going to college, working the job for a while, developing all these skills, developing the relationships. If you were to go back at that 18 to 20-year-old stage, would you have started a business right away instead?
The difference, I would probably say no. And here's the reason is I think the times were a little bit different, right? Like you said, there's a lot more opportunity now, especially with tech exploding the last 20 years, right? And so that goes back to when I started. And that said, I didn't have the great mentorship as growing up as I have the last 10 or 15 years, right? And so I think it also tends, if you have those great leaders and mentorship growing up that can help you with that, then yes. And I think there's just, right now is just an opportune time, as well as, the VCs have exploded the last 20 years. 20 years ago, there weren't a lot. And so I think there's a lot more opportunity now. Also with technology. So, each person, that's the other thing to your question. I think each person has their own individual route. There's not one game plan that you could say this works for everybody. And it's to follow your own route, and timing may not always, it might not happen right away. But, I mean, you said you read Elon Musk. I read the Steve Jobs one, which I loved. I mean, look at what he had to go through to get Apple up and running. There was a lot of hits and misses there. So that would be the one thing I would say is just keep working on it. And your time, everybody's timing is different. Mine is now, and there's a reason. My kids are older. Didn't have to worry about healthcare as much as I did when they were younger. Right? There's some things that have changed in my life, and part of it is I want the opportunity to do what I want to do when I want to do and work with who I want to work. And that's the whole thing about entrepreneurship.
I think that entrepreneurship is interesting because I started my business early on. I started when I was 20 years old. Now I'm 23. But I worked from 18 to 20 instead of going to college. So I worked for a mortgage company. So I kind of got to see what business was like, both from not a huge scale, but more like mid-sized company because I worked for a mortgage company. So we had a small team, but we were part of a larger organization. So I got to see some of the inner workings. And now that I'm 23 and I look back and I analyze like, okay, a lot of my friends are coming out of college now. So now they're entering life in a similar stage that I am. And it's like, I'm able to have more conversations with them, and they talk to me and they say, "Oh man, you're going to be super successful. You're going to do this because you're willing to take the risk." And I ask them, "You're talking all this about me like I'm 45, 50 years old, like you're not still 23 years old and can't go do something." So I guess the thing that I'm working through right now is how do you get people to see that even at 23 years old, 24 years old, 25 years old, even though you went to college and you spent the last 3 years, it's not too late to go start something, to go take that risk. How do you get people into a risk-oriented mindset of like, hey, the worst thing that could happen is failure. The worst thing that could happen is a no. How do you get people into that mind frame?
You nailed it. It's the mindset, right? And it's changing a mindset or perceived belief. Like, for example, society kind of tells us, go to college, work a 9 to 5, build your 401k, retire. Like, now the narrative is changing, and it has changed over the past like 5 to 10 years. But like if you asked like me when I was growing up, that was it. It was, hey, go to college, get a job, buy a house, start a family, retire. Now it's like, okay, you have this whole thing about living, traveling, experiences. And that has changed the whole mindset of people. And so to go back to your question, it's a mindset. Like, it's hard to, if the person's not believing in their head that they can actually do this, it's hard for you to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And you've probably even noticed, and even it happens at my age with people that are in a 9 to 5. I'm not on the same wavelength. Like, I'm thinking all the time, how do I do this? What can we do? What do we build? What about this? They're thinking, when am I done with work? Can I relax on the weekend? I have weekends, but they're not week. There's always something going on, which is what I love. And unless you're in that mindset, regardless of age, it's really hard to get someone on your same wavelength. But it's something you just have to decide you want to do. And because, like, as you know, and this is something I learned, the first 3 or 4 months I was like half-heartedly doing it. You're not going to get the benefits or rewards. You either need to be all in or you're not, right? You need, like you said, you have to know that you may fail, and you have to be okay with that. And if you're not, it might not be for you.
You know what's interesting? As you say the word failure, I think failure comes in a lot of different ways, a lot of different packages.
Correct.
Failure doesn't just look like I'm out of money. Failure also looks like you're out of energy. Failure also looks like you said, not putting your heart into it. You failed if you're not doing that. And it reminds me of a quote from Naval Ravikant. He said that a startup doesn't die when it runs out of money. It dies when the founders run out of energy. That right there is failure, not putting your all into it, not waking up every day excited. And there's going to be moments. But I think one of the most important things is to define, what am I trying to accomplish, and chase after that. Because if you don't define that, then you're always going to live in this state of monotony, just going through the motions. And that is actually what real failure is.
100% agree. And I think one of the best things I had a friend tell me, maybe about 5 or 7 years ago, is define your personal mission and vision. Mm-hmm. Who are you? Like, not let's deconstruct business from who are you? And then from there, you start to look at, actually, when I started doing that exercise is actually when entrepreneur really, because I started to find who I was and what I wanted to be. And all of a sudden, those entrepreneurial traits really started to gravitate. And I wasn't trying to define that on purpose. But it's based on who you really are. And if you could do that, but if you define your own personal mission and vision, you use that as a North Star. And like you said, then you go into business, and that, especially entrepreneurship, it shouldn't be two different personalities, right? It's what are you trying to accomplish? I'm working with someone right now on a new studio, one of the greatest people I've worked with over the past 15 years. And we've known each other all the way back from Battlefield. Like you said, we're going through VC funding right now, hit and miss right now in the gaming industry, trying to get funding. But his passion for his product is probably one of the best I've ever seen, and his passion for what his vision is.
Wow.
And it's easy for me to buy in because I want to be part of that versus someone it's like, I want to make money. It's like, yes, but what's your passion? Because if you're passionate about something, the money will follow.
And if you are just chasing money, then you also have a cap on yourself as well.
Well, like you said, it's
Because
your
it's
objective.
like-
If your objective is money, then what are you putting a dollar figure on it?
Yeah.
Because that's another thing I've learned over my years is I didn't think I would be in certain positions. Then when I hit that, you're like, okay, well, that was my goal, what now?
Yep.
Right? And as an entrepreneur, when you start to really evaluate what you mean or what you value, it's not necessarily a monetary figure. It's more of a lifestyle or what you want out of something, a meaning. And you're always chasing that versus, hey, I want to make $1 million, or hey, I want to make this, or hey, I want to do this, right? Because there's different ways now you could do that.
Yeah. I think viewing money as not a thing to accumulate, but more as it's like blood. You need it to survive. You need it to keep going. The more that you have, the more cool things that you can do. But that's all it is. It's the fuel in your car. The more fuel you have, the further that you can go. So you're not just going to save a bunch of gallons in your house for later. Like that, there's no point to that. Like, hey, obviously you need to save and be smart and do those things. But to hoard all of these things, no, it's meant to be used in good ways that are going to help you grow, that are going to help you do the things that you want. So I think putting that dollar figure, that's not the right way to run a business.
Sometimes it could lead to not following what you actually want to do, and it's going to make you happy. So money doesn't make you happy. Doing something with passion makes you happy. And then, like you said, the rewards will follow, and that allows you to travel, allows you to spend more time with the family. It allows you to do all those things that create happiness, but the dollar doesn't create happiness. It's how you get it and what you do with it that actually does it. And that's where, you really have to look at following your passion versus, hey, how do I make money? Because if that's all you do, in 5 years, you're going to be burnt. And then what do you have to show for it?
Really interesting mindset, man. Last question for you, last set of questions for you. If you could whisper in your 20-year-old self's ear one message, what would that message be? What would you want to remind him of?
I think that we talked a little bit and I hit on it. It's the faith over fear message. Live in faith, not fear, because especially at 20, the world seems big and overwhelming. And you've even touched on it, right? You come out of college, it's like, well, what do I do now? Follow what you want to do and follow your passion. And I will say this, and I don't want to go back because I know what you're talking about, but you asked a question about why did I go the path I went. I was very fortunate to work in the NFL and gaming. Like with what I was doing, I was fulfilled and happy. Mm-hmm. If I'm working in somewhere where I'm not doing what I do and building brands, and especially iconic brands, I probably wouldn't have stayed as long, right? And so I was just very fortunate to be in fields that I loved what I was doing.
Backup question to that. What do you think your 65-year-old self would tell you in your current stage, looking forward into the future?
I think it would be that it would be proud of the perseverance. In other words, wherever I was in life, focusing on what I wanted to do and chasing what my passion was. Because I think you can go through life and then you get to your 65-year-old self and be like, well, what did I do? What did I accomplish? Right? And those are things that as I'm closer to that than the 20-year-old self, unfortunately. You think about those a lot. So that would be the biggest thing is the perseverance side, and be proud of the perseverance.
There you go. Man, I want to end it off with one message that you would like to leave to the audience. If you could leave one message out in the world and this was the only thing that you could leave behind, what would that one message be?
We talked about this a little bit. So it's pretty much follow your passion and don't be afraid of what's next on the other side, because you never know what's on the other side unless you try it, right? We hear all the time, we hear the cynics and people asking, maybe you shouldn't do this or maybe you shouldn't do that. You have to decide what's in your heart and what's right for you, and it's different. The path is different for everyone else. So don't compare your path to somebody else's. Focus on what your meaning is, your why is, and your mission, and focus on that and follow that.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for coming on to the Michelotti podcast today. Thank you. We have Savannah over here in the background as well. She actually introduced us. She's an incredible networker. So if people want to connect with you, where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, I think the best way is through LinkedIn, through either Kevin Kimball or Game On Strategies. That's where I do most of my business.
Incredible. And then Savannah, pop over here. Tell people where they can connect with you too. You're in my seat. She's in the hot seat.
LinkedIn as well, Savannah Alcori. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Trey. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Savannah.
And thank you guys for listening to the podcast today. I will see you guys on the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe if you like content like this. And I appreciate everybody. I'll see you guys later.